Can this be a key pivot point for us and for our country? How will we act in response to Orlando, the largest mass shooting in American history? When gathered here in this church on this beautiful June day, should we even name it again? When we leave here, what will we do? What will you do? Orlando may not have been the top issue on your mind today or even this week. Maybe it couldn't be due to other pressures or crises in your life. Maybe you couldn't bear to let it remain front and center. To function, you had to move on. Some of you are numbed by mass shootings, so many that this one just rolled by. A shooting at a Columbine high school became another at Virginia Tech College, became another in first and second grade classrooms in Sandy Hook. One shooting at a movie theater became one at an office holiday party, became one at a church Bible study group. With that history, perhaps you no longer flinch. But for others of you, Orlando's tragedy has been very present. For 7 days, you have sobbed for people you knew, or sobbed for the young lives erased when they had barely begun. Perhaps you have felt so vulnerable, painfully aware of life's fragility, of the hatred that you also have experienced just because of who you are. Some of you have fumed or shouted, furious at the injustice and the hatred and the killer. As human beings, we all respond differently to tragedies like that in Orlando, based on our own past, based often on how closely we can relate personally. I understand. But the thing that nags at me, the worry I have, is about our human tendency to distance ourselves from others by making little boxes in our minds, differentiating ourselves from other people so that we feel safe, like erecting our own box pew with high walls, instead of sitting more exposed in chairs in a circle. For example, here in Boston, when a black 17-year-old boy was shot to death outside his high school 10 days ago, were you worried for other people you know living in Boston? Did you call them to see if they felt safe? Or did you instinctively assume the Bostonians I know are different, therefore safe? They're white. They don't live in Dorchester. Their kids aren't in the Boston public schools. They wouldn't know that grieving family. And in Orlando this week, which story grabbed more at your heartstrings? The 2-year-old boy from Nebraska playing on a small beach outside the Grand Floridian Hotel at Disney World, attacked and drowned by an alligator, or the 49 Latino gay, lesbian, and transgender dancers gunned down in a nightclub. It's not a competition. Both are awful, but it's worth all of us thinking about our reactions. Which drew us in more? Our answers may well depend on which situation struck us as more like something we and our loved ones might experience, a trip to Disney World with family or a gay bar. Which place would provide you more respite from the world? Dancing to great music with people who accepted you, or a beach resort? I'm not condemning this instinctive reaction. Being able to distinguish situations is a skill we hone as we mature. A nurse must distinguish between medications. A chef must be able to tell the quality of food, what is fresh and what is past the date. But when it comes to people, our fellow human beings on this planet, as we mature, do we hone our natural instinct to push those unknown into a distant box far from our own? Or do we resist this temptation, making a conscious effort as we mature to seek out our common humanity? For the further their box is from ours, the easier it is to label them excludable, even expendable. African slaves, of course, weren't really human, so they could be worked to death. Some immigrants are criminals or untrustworthy, so shouldn't be hired. Bostonians put out signs, no Irish need apply. When we gather in this church on this beautiful June day, do we even name Orlando? When we leave here, what will we do? What will you do? The reason I think Orlando could prove a pivot point for us and our nation is that its facts defied easy characterization. 1 week later, there's no one national narrative to explain it. No one box that makes most of us feel safe. No one box that blames one cause. The New York Times commented on this phenomenon this week. There is one narrative that has blamed the Orlando tragedy on gun policy. You know, the terrorists could get them, or the mentally ill, or too many people, or not enough people. There should have been guns held by those in the club. Some said that the problem was caused by particular types of guns or particular magazines. A second narrative names hatred against gays. Orlando follows the raid on Stonewall Inn, Matthew Shepard's brutal death in Wyoming, and the Holocaust. It is fostered by every slur uttered casually, every incendiary speech equating pedophiles with gay men, every law in Florida on the books today that will not protect gays from being fired simply for being gay. There was an excellent piece in the Globe this week by Michael Andor Broder saying, after Orlando shooting, it's time to stop being sick with fear. He describes his lifetime here as a gay man, sick with fear, and now he wants to be sick of the fear. He hopes for a change. A third narrative fought for airspace. Hatred of Latinos was barely mentioned as a possible cause of the Orlando murders. Although nearly all of the victims were Hispanic, I wonder why. Are we a country that has accepted people across race? Or is it the opposite? We're so accustomed to public racism spoken with impunity against immigrants, brown people, and the Spanish-speaking that no one even comments on these separate boxes anymore. A fourth narrative prominent in the press and with politicians labeled Islam as the box to be built and walled off, a way to distinguish the rest of us. Under this theory, Muslims are potential terrorists to be feared, or at least Muslims from a particular region or a country. Even American citizens, it is said, are threats if they pray to Allah during this holy season of Ramadan. A faint fifth narrative emerged. How do any of us grapple with the unbearable feeling of worthlessness for what we have done or for who we are? The grief and the sorrow so intense that hardly anyone can examine it alone. Are churches helping with this or harming? Does government fund enough mental health care? All boxes of blame or separation. When gathered here in this church on this beautiful June day, do we even mention Orlando, or have we said enough? Should we move on? When we leave here, what will we do? Our country, when at its best, always breaks down divisions between separate boxes rather than building up walls. Our church was present at the nation's founding, so we know that slowly we've been moving toward that initial ideal stated by our forebears, that all men are created equal, all religions acceptable, all entrusted with the vote to exercise their individual power of reason. At our nation's birth, of course, those who had most power were worried that they might lose it, so they hedged the model of equality. Only property owners could vote, and the Senate was essentially our version of the House of Lords. But still, equality was espoused. Later, even though many of the powerful people grew rich on free slave labor and cheap immigrant workers, At our greatest moments, America still hewed to the principle of equality and dignity of all, banning slavery, allowing unions, limiting work hours, and ensuring worker safety. Of course, those worried about losing their place or profits formed the Ku Klux Klan and the Know Nothing Party to keep blacks, Catholics, Jews, and immigrants in their separate, distant boxes. But in time, the vote was extended to women as well as men, blacks as well as whites, the poor as well as property owners, walls of our boxes slowly falling. When huge swaths of people were impoverished in the Depression, many were thrown into the same box. And we voted to care for the elderly through Social Security and Medicare. When TV arrived, Americans began to see themselves in the faces of those hosed and chased by dogs, and we began to ban segregation. People should be judged as individuals, not by their box of color, religion, gender, or sexual orientation. You see, if boxes discriminate unfairly against some individuals, we knocked down those walls, though of course some still stand. Now a huge wall standing is financial. The income inequality gap growing exponentially since 1980. But we don't always talk about that, and instead return to the boxes of color and religion to blame people outside our country or outside Christianity who are brown or black. Now, the Apostle Paul was livid when the early churches erected walls again. It cut against his entire message. So in Galatia, when those circumcised as Jews thought themselves closer to God than the Greeks, Paul rebuts them over and over and over. Jesus made us all equal, he declares. None of us earn God's love. It's given to you, a gift, pure grace. None of us deserves it based on which box we're in. We're all given love, free and clear, equal amounts in every box. Do you believe it? The walls we've erected for privacy and security vanish in God's eyes. Our box is completely useless when it comes to getting God's love. They're harmful if they suggest a hierarchy of worth. Our current American trajectory was forged in response to 9/11. We had choices then, and we do again now, 15 years later. Where would we be now if we had focused more on a Marshall-like aid plan than on warfare, on reaching across lines more than erecting new boxes based on difference? The Times reports that the number of Taliban in Afghanistan today is greater than in 2001. Killing always begets killing. The New Testament Paul and the Old Testament prophet Elijah, about whom we heard this morning, both had followed the plan that America chose after 9/11, slaughter of our enemies. Both Elijah and Paul were murderers, convinced that the way to be most zealous for God was to kill their enemies. The way to protect what was most valuable to them in their homeland was to rid the land of those with the wrong religious views, to destroy the threat before it destroyed us. So Elijah slaughtered 450 priests of the rival god Baal, and Paul cheered when Christians were stoned to death, until they reached a pivot point and were changed. For Elijah, the change arose when he was scared to death, hiding alone in a cave. "Why are you here, Elijah?" asked God. "Why are you so afraid?" "Well, God, I have been the most zealous person on your side. I killed 450 priests who threatened our religious view, and now their supporters want revenge. They're coming to kill me, and I am afraid. I give up." But God shows himself to Elijah not in the violent storms, but in a moment of quiet. And then the prophet returns to the world, still fearless. But now he speaks up for the voiceless and the poor. For Paul, his pivot point, his change came differently. It wasn't at a time when he was afraid, as we may have felt this last week. Rather, it was a time when Paul was barreling ahead, filled with fury and hate, charging down the road to Damascus, Syria, to destroy religious enemies there. But he's knocked down, blinded by a great light, and he senses God's presence. Why are you trying to destroy your religious rival? Both Paul and Elijah stopped in their tracks by God made to face their ways of hate and violence. Paul blinded alone for 3 days. Elijah hides in the dark cave. For both out of their time of reflection, of experiencing God's presence, they're irrevocably changed. They change their hate-filled ways, returning to the world fearless again, but focused on including others. The old box is gone. I know that some say Paul is the one who has sanctioned homophobia, but I disagree. That is another sermon I've given before. I'd be happy to come back to it. But know this, Paul alone demands that all of us be welcomed into Christianity. Could Orlando be our pivot point? Whether you have responded so far, energized against our enemies as Paul was, or have felt defeated and frightened like Elijah, what would an experience of God indicate we should do after that tragedy? Were we willing to stop and ponder it? In the sound of silence through which God speaks, what would we learn? How would we then return to the world and act? Can Orlando inspire us to break out of the little boxes we use to blame outsiders for the slaughter or segregate ourselves from the whole ordeal, convincing ourselves it didn't really impact us? Paul says Orlando is a tragedy that affects you because we are all one. The boxes are an illusion. There's no hierarchy in God's eyes. Neither slave nor free, Greek nor Jew, male nor female, neither gay nor straight, Christian or Muslim, neither American or Syrian, Latino or Anglo, just beloved children of God. Love, the free gift to each of us the world over. 1 year ago, almost exactly 1 year ago, when a white man was welcomed into a black church in Charlestown, South Carolina, he killed those praying together there. What do you most remember about that? Isn't it that he, a stranger, had been welcomed into their midst? Isn't it that the church family said they forgave him? And isn't it that the citizens demanded changes and Confederate flags came down? Acknowledgement finally that those flags had promoted a race hatred, the kind that the young killer had been poisoned by. Can this be a pivotal moment for us? When we leave here, what will we do as people from this church? What will you do? Listen to the words of our final hymn. Sing it like it is a prayer. It is mine.